No! What are you doing? Stop!
Police called on veteran training service Dog and Park. What happened after the taser shocked the whole town? The crack of the taser echoed across Riverside Park like a gunshot, sending 45-pound German Shepherd Bruno collapsing to the ground in convulsions, while his handler, Army veteran David Martinez, screamed in horror at the sight of his service dog being electrocuted for the crime of protecting his partner during a PTSD episode. Officer Kevin Thompson lowered his weapon with the satisfaction of someone who believed he just neutralized a dangerous animal, completely unaware that he just committed what would become the most documented police brutality case in Millfield's history. "You just tasered my service dog," David cried, his voice breaking as he knelt beside Bruno's twitching form. "He's trained to alert when I'm having panic attacks. That's what he was doing." What Officer Thompson didn't know was that 17-year-old Maya Chin had been live streaming her afternoon run when she captured every second of the encounter on her phone. Within hours, the footage of a combat veteran service dog being tasered by police would ignite a firestorm of outrage that would transform both a small town's understanding of disability rights and one veteran's journey from victim to national advocate. Riverside Park, Millfield, Ohio, 2:25. The 20-acre green space served as the community's primary recreation area, where families held picnics, joggers completed their daily routes, and pet owners exercised their dogs in areas specifically designated for animal activities. The park's popularity made it ideal for service dog training, providing the kind of public environment with controlled distractions that helped veterans and their partners prepare for real-world scenarios they'd encounter together. Staff Sergeant David Martinez embodied the challenging transition from military service to civilian life that affected thousands of combat veterans whose invisible wounds were more debilitating than their visible scars. At 29, he carried the trauma of 2 deployments to Iraq, where his role as a convoy leader had exposed him to daily IED threats, sniper attacks, and the constant hypervigilance that kept soldiers alive in combat zones, but made civilian life feel perpetually dangerous. Bruno represented 18 months of intensive training and a $40,000 investment in therapeutic intervention that had transformed David's life from barely manageable survival to functional daily living. The German Shepherd's tasks included detecting the onset of panic attacks through scent changes, creating physical barriers during episodes of hypervigilance, interrupting nightmares through trained wake-up protocols, and providing deep pressure therapy that prevented David's PTSD symptoms from escalating to crisis levels. Their training sessions in Riverside Park were part of a comprehensive program designed to maintain Bruno's skills while exposing him to the urban environments where his work would be most crucial. The exercises included crowd desensitization, noise tolerance, and the kind of protective positioning that had made Bruno invaluable during David's transition from military to civilian employment as a logistics coordinator for a regional shipping company. Officer Kevin Thompson represented the institutional gaps in police training that left law enforcement unprepared to distinguish between genuine threats and service animals performing their trained functions. His 8 years with the Millfield Police Department had emphasized quick threat assessment and decisive action, but his training on disability accommodation and service animal law consisted of a single PowerPoint presentation that prioritized officer safety over civilian rights. The broader context was a community where military service was respected in theory, but rarely understood in practice, where residents appreciated veteran sacrifice while remaining largely ignorant about the daily realities of combat-related disabilities. Service dogs were novelties rather than recognized medical equipment, their presence more likely to generate curiosity than understanding about their essential therapeutic functions. Maya Chen, the high school senior whose live stream would document the incident, represented a generation that instinctively recorded injustice while possessing the social media skills to amplify local issues into national conversations. Her afternoon jog through Riverside Park was routine until she noticed the confrontation developing between the police officer and the veteran with his dog. Her decision to begin recording reflecting teenage instincts about documenting authority figures rather than any understanding of the civil rights violation she was about to witness. The collision between David's accommodation needs and Officer Thompson's threat-focused training was building toward a confrontation that would expose how institutional ignorance could transform legitimate disability management into criminal suspicion. David's PTSD symptoms, Bruno's protective responses, and Thompson's aggressive approach created a perfect storm where misunderstanding would escalate into violence against a disabled veteran and his service animal. The community's reaction would test whether Millfield's proclaimed support for veterans extended to understanding and protecting the accommodations that made their civilian reintegration possible, or whether that support was merely symbolic rhetoric that collapsed when confronted with the challenging realities of invisible disabilities and service animal partnerships. The afternoon training session had been progressing normally, with David working Bruno through the crowd desensitization exercises that kept his service dog sharp for real-world scenarios they'd encounter in shopping centers, restaurants, and the workplace environments where PTSD could manifest without warning. The German Shepherd's performance was textbook perfect, maintaining focus on his handler while remaining calm despite joggers, children playing, and the normal distractions that filled Riverside Park on pleasant afternoons. "Good boy, Bruno, hold position," David commanded as he deliberately created a mild stress scenario to test his dog's protective instincts, his voice carrying the controlled tension that simulated the kind of anxiety triggers that could precipitate PTSD episodes in civilian settings. Bruno's response was immediate and professional, moving into the alert stance that indicated he was monitoring his handler's physiological state for changes that would require intervention. The crisis began when Sandra Williams, walking her small Yorkshire Terrier near the training area, witnessed Bruno's protective positioning and interpreted it as aggressive behavior that threatened public safety. Her 911 call was breathless and dramatic. "There's a large German Shepherd in Riverside Park that looks like it's about to attack. The owner seems to be encouraging it. You need to send someone immediately before someone gets hurt." The dispatch to Officer Thompson was coded as an aggressive animal complaint with possible public endangerment, language that primed him for confrontation rather than investigation. His arrival at the park was tactical rather than inquisitive, with his approach suggesting that he'd already determined the situation was dangerous rather than assessing whether any actual threat existed. David's first indication of trouble came when he noticed Bruno's shift in attention from their training exercise to something behind them, the dog's ears perking up in the way that indicated an approaching person whose intentions he couldn't yet assess. Turning, David saw the uniformed officer striding toward them with purposeful authority that immediately triggered his own combat-conditioned hypervigilance. "Sir, I need you to control that animal," Officer Thompson announced without introduction or inquiry about the nature of the training session, his hand already resting on his duty belt, in a manner that suggested he was prepared for escalation rather than conversation. "We've received complaints about an aggressive dog threatening park visitors." David's response was immediate and professional, drawing on military training that emphasized de-escalation and clear communication with authority figures. "Officer, this is Bruno, my service dog. We're conducting training exercises as part of my PTSD management program. He's not aggressive. He's performing his trained protective functions." The explanation should have resolved the situation, but Thompson's approach was based on threat assessment rather than accommodation inquiry. His observation of Bruno's alert posture and David's elevated stress levels confirmed his preconceptions about dangerous animals and potentially unstable handlers, rather than revealing the legitimate medical partnership that was functioning exactly as trained. "I don't care what you call it," Thompson replied with escalating authority. "That dog is displaying aggressive behavior, and I'm ordering you to restrain it immediately. If you can't control your animal, I'll control it for you." The ultimatum created exactly the kind of confrontational environment that David's PTSD made unbearable, while triggering Bruno's protective instincts in ways that Thompson interpreted as confirmation of his threat assessment. The service dog's training had taught him to position himself between his handler and perceived threat's behavior that looked protective to trained observers but appeared aggressive to someone expecting canine submission. Maya Chen's decision to begin live streaming was instinctive rather than calculated, her teenage understanding of social dynamics, telling her that something significant was happening, while her generation's comfort with recording everything provided documentation that would prove essential for subsequent events. Her phone captured not just the confrontation, but the context that would be crucial for understanding how quickly the situation escalated from routine training to civil rights violation. The buildup was inexorable, as David's attempts to explain service dog law met Thompson's commitment to enforcing authority, while Bruno's trained responses to his handler's rising stress were interpreted as evidence of the aggressive behavior that justified the officer's initial assumptions. The escalation accelerated when David attempted to demonstrate Bruno's training by having the dog perform a basic medical alert sequence, hoping to prove that the German Shepherd was a working service animal rather than an aggressive pet. But Bruno's movement toward David during the demonstration was interpreted by Thompson as an attack in progress, triggering the officer's tactical response training that prioritized immediate neutralization of perceived threats. "That's it. I'm not waiting for this dog to attack someone," Thompson declared as he drew his taser, his voice carrying the authority of someone who believed he was preventing imminent violence rather than about to commit it. "Step away from the animal immediately, or I'll consider you a threat as well." Maya's live stream captured every word while her phone's GPS tagged the location and time, creating a digital record that would prove devastating for Thompson's subsequent claims about the incident's circumstances. Her commentary was minimal, but pointed, "This police officer is threatening to tase a service dog that's just doing its job protecting a veteran." David's military training kicked in as he recognized the tactical situation developing his hands, moving into a non-threatening position, while his voice attempted to maintain calm authority. "Officer Thompson, please listen to me. Bruno is a trained service dog performing medical functions. Tasing him could kill him and would violate federal disability law." But Thompson's decision had already been made. His threat assessment, concluding that the dog's continued movement and the handler's obvious distress indicated a dangerous situation that required immediate intervention. His understanding of service dog law was minimal, while his training emphasized decisive action over extended negotiation when public safety appeared threatened. The moment of crisis came when David, overwhelmed by the confrontational environment and Thompson's obvious intent to harm Bruno, began experiencing the kind of panic attack that his service dog was trained to interrupt and manage. His breathing became rapid and shallow, his hands started trembling, and his awareness of present circumstances began fragmenting as combat memories merged with current stress. Bruno's response was immediate and professional, the German Shepherd moving into position to provide deep pressure therapy while emitting the low vocalizations that his training had taught him to use for alerting medical personnel to his handler's distress. To trained observers, the dog's behavior was textbook medical intervention, but to Thompson, it confirmed his assumption that the animal was becoming aggressive and posed imminent danger. "That dog is attacking!" Thompson shouted, his voice carrying across the park as he raised his taser and prepared to fire. "Everyone get back. I'm neutralizing the threat." Maya's live stream captured the moment with crystal clarity, a service dog performing trained medical functions being targeted by police officer whose ignorance about disability accommodation was about to become criminal assault. Her exclamation was audible on the recording, "No, don't shoot. That dog is helping him, not attacking." The taser deployment was swift and brutal, 50,000 volts coursing through Bruno's body as he collapsed in convulsions while his agonized yelps echoed across Riverside Park. The electrical charge disrupted his nervous system and muscular control, leaving him writhing on the ground while David screamed in horror at witnessing his lifeline being tortured by the very authority figures he'd once served. "Bruno, you killed my dog," David cried as he crawled toward his service animal, his own PTSD episode intensifying as the sight of his partner's suffering triggered memories of wounded soldiers he'd been unable to save in Iraq. "He was trying to help me. Why didn't you listen?" The aftermath was immediate chaos, as park visitors who had witnessed the incident began shouting at Thompson, their outrage creating exactly the kind of hostile crowd situation that police training taught officers to avoid. Maya's live stream was being shared in real time, with comments exploding as viewers realized they were watching a disabled veteran service dog being electrocuted for performing its trained medical functions. Thompson's attempts to justify his actions revealed the depth of his ignorance about service animal law and disability accommodation. That dog was displaying aggressive behavior and posed a threat to public safety. I used appropriate force to neutralize the danger before anyone got hurt. But the video evidence was overwhelming and contradictory to his narrative, showing Bruno performing obvious medical functions while David was clearly experiencing a medical emergency that his service dog was trained to manage. The contrast between Thompson's claims and the visual reality captured on Maya's phone created immediate credibility problems that would plague all subsequent official statements. The crowd's reaction was transforming from confusion to anger, as more witnesses realized they had watched a police officer assault a disabled veteran's medical equipment while the veteran was experiencing the exact crisis that his service dog was trained to prevent. The moral clarity was overwhelming. An innocent animal had been tortured for trying to help someone whose military service had earned protection rather than persecution. The viral spread was beginning as Maya's live stream was shared across multiple social media platforms, with each share adding comments that provided context about service dog rights and police accountability. The local incident was becoming regional news story within minutes, with the potential to reach national attention as viewers recognized the broader implications of what they were witnessing. The horror deepened when Bruno's convulsions continued for nearly 3 minutes, his nervous system overwhelmed by electrical trauma that left him unable to stand or respond to David's desperate attempts to comfort him. The service dog, who had been performing his trained life-saving functions, now lay motionless, except for involuntary muscle spasms, his breathing shallow and irregular as neurological damage from the taser disrupted basic biological functions. "Get an ambulance, call animal control, someone help him!" David screamed as he knelt beside his partner, his own PTSD episode escalating as Bruno's condition triggered combat memories of wounded soldiers whose injuries he'd been powerless to treat. The convergence of past trauma and present crisis was creating exactly the kind of psychological breakdown that Bruno's presence had been preventing for 2 years. Officer Thompson's response revealed both his ignorance and his growing realization that the situation had escalated beyond his ability to control or justify. "Sir, you need to calm down and step away from the animal. I'll call for animal control to handle the situation properly." His words demonstrated complete failure to understand that he'd just assaulted essential medical equipment while its user was experiencing medical emergency. Maya's live stream captured every moment, while her commentary provided crucial context for viewers who were witnessing police brutality against both a disabled veteran and his service animal. The dog is barely breathing. This officer just tortured an animal that was trying to help someone with PTSD. This is completely insane. The crowd that had gathered was becoming increasingly hostile as more witnesses understood the true nature of what had occurred. Park visitors who had initially supported police intervention were now confronting Thompson directly, their anger creating exactly the kind of volatile situation that proper de-escalation training was designed to prevent. "You just tasered a service dog, you moron," shouted retired teacher Margaret Stevens, whose grandson had PTSD from Afghanistan deployment. "That animal was doing his job protecting a veteran, and you attacked him for it." Her outrage was amplified by a dozen other voices as the crowd's mood shifted from confusion to condemnation. The darkest moment came when veterinary technician Sarah Kim, who happened to be jogging through the park, examined Bruno and delivered a devastating assessment. "This dog needs immediate emergency veterinary care. The electrical trauma has caused neurological damage that could be permanent. His muscle control and coordination may never recover fully." David's breakdown was complete as he realized that Thompson's ignorance had potentially destroyed the service dog whose partnership had made civilian life possible. Bruno represented not just companionship, but independence, employment capability, and psychological stability that could be irreplaceable if his injuries proved permanent. 2 years of training, $40,000. My lifeline, David whispered through tears as paramedics arrived to treat both him and Bruno. He saved my life every day, and now he might die because some cop couldn't tell the difference between medical alert and aggression. The institutional response was predictably defensive as Millfield Police Department began damage control that prioritized protecting Officer Thompson over acknowledging the civil rights violation that Maya's video had documented. Chief Robert Harrison's initial statement revealed departmental culture that valued officer support over constitutional compliance. Our officer responded appropriately to reports of an aggressive animal threatening public safety. The legal implications were staggering as civil rights attorneys who had viewed Maya's viral video began contacting David about federal lawsuits that could cost the city millions while establishing precedent for service animal protection. The Americans with Disabilities Act violations were clear and unambiguous, with video evidence that made denial impossible and justified punitive damages. The media explosion was instantaneous as local news stations picked up the story, with Maya's footage providing dramatic visuals that made the incident perfect for television coverage. The narrative was compelling and unambiguous. Disabled veteran service dog, tortured by police while performing life-saving medical functions, creating sympathy that transcended political boundaries. The psychological impact on David was devastating, as the incident triggered the worst PTSD episode he'd experienced since beginning work with Bruno. His coping mechanisms destroyed, along with his service dog's ability to provide intervention. The man who had been functioning independently was now facing potential return to the kind of psychological instability that had made employment and social interaction nearly impossible. The community's moral crisis was equally profound as residents confronted evidence that their police force had committed civil rights violations against a veteran whose service had earned protection rather than persecution. The incident was forcing uncomfortable questions about institutional prejudice and the gap between proclaimed support for veterans and actual understanding of their accommodation needs. The viral momentum was building unstoppably as the video reached national social media with millions of views, creating pressure for federal investigation and systemic reform that would transform how law enforcement approached service animal encounters nationwide. The transformation began when Dr. Jennifer Walsh, one of the region's leading veterinary neurologists, arrived at the emergency animal hospital where Bruno was fighting for his life. Her examination revealed the devastating extent of the Taser's neurological damage, while her reputation brought media attention that elevated the incident from local news story to national scandal, requiring immediate institutional response. This service dog has suffered significant neurological trauma that will require months of specialized treatment and may result in permanent disability, Dr. Walsh announced during a hastily arranged press conference outside the veterinary hospital. The electrical discharge has damaged nerve pathways essential for his trained service functions. This is not just animal abuse, it's the destruction of medical equipment that a disabled veteran depends on for survival. The medical assessment was devastating, but also legally crucial, providing expert testimony that transformed Thompson's assault from property damage to federal civil rights violation with measurable consequences that could justify millions in damages. Dr. Walsh's willingness to serve as expert witness gave David's case the kind of professional credibility that made legal victory inevitable. But the real transformation began with the community's response to Maya's viral video, which had reached over 2 million views within 24 hours, while generating thousands of comments expressing outrage at police brutality against a disabled veteran and his service animal. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming, crossing political and demographic lines that usually divided communities on police accountability issues. The GoFundMe campaign, launched by Maya and her friends, exceeded all expectations, raising $150,000 in its first week for Bruno's medical expenses and David's lost wages during his PTSD recovery. The donations came with messages of support from veterans, dog lovers, disability advocates, and ordinary citizens who recognized injustice when they saw it documented in high definition. "I've never seen community support like this," David told Channel 7 News during his first interview. Since the incident, his voice still shaky, but his message clear. "People understand that Bruno wasn't just my pet, he was my partner, my medical equipment, my lifeline back to normal life. Officer Thompson didn't just hurt my dog, he tried to destroy my independence." The legal response was swift and comprehensive, with the American Civil Liberties Union and Disabled American Veterans Organization providing legal representation that transformed David's case from individual lawsuit to federal civil rights action. The legal team's expertise in disability law and police accountability created a formidable challenge to Millfield's attempts to minimize or justify Thompson's actions. The breakthrough came when federal investigators from the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division arrived in Millfield to conduct a pattern and practice investigation of the police department's treatment of disabled citizens. The investigation revealed systematic gaps in training and accountability that made Thompson's assault predictable rather than aberrational. This incident represents broader institutional failures in how law enforcement approaches disability accommodation and service animal encounters, announced Assistant U.S. Attorney Patricia Morrison during a federal press conference. "Our investigation will determine whether Millfield Police Department has systematically violated the civil rights of disabled citizens through inadequate training and supervision." The political pressure intensified when Senator Elizabeth Warren and Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez demanded congressional hearings on police training and service animal rights, their national platforms amplifying David's story while connecting it to broader issues of police accountability and disability rights that resonated with millions of Americans. But the most meaningful transformation was personal, as David channeled his trauma into advocacy that gave his experience purpose beyond individual suffering. His testimony before Congress was passionate and informed, drawing on both military service and civilian persecution to educate lawmakers about the realities of service animal partnerships and the consequences of institutional ignorance. "Bruno didn't just save me from PTSD episodes," David told the House Judiciary Committee during nationally televised hearings. "He saved me from the kind of despair that kills 22 veterans every day through suicide. When Officer Thompson tasered my service dog, he was attacking not just an animal, but the therapeutic relationship that kept me alive and functional." The legislative response was immediate and bipartisan, with the Service Animal Protection Act passing both houses of Congress within 6 months. The law created federal criminal penalties for assaulting service animals, while mandating specialized training for law enforcement on disability accommodation and service animal law. The institutional changes were equally comprehensive, with Millfield Police Department implementing complete reform of their policies and training under federal oversight. Officer Thompson was terminated and faced federal criminal charges, while Chief Harrison was forced to resign as part of a settlement that included $2.7 million in damages and a consent decree requiring ongoing federal monitoring. The educational impact extended nationwide as police academies incorporated David's case into their curricula about disability rights and de-escalation techniques. The incident became a textbook example of how ignorance and aggression could violate constitutional rights while creating massive liability for law enforcement agencies. Bruno's recovery was remarkable but incomplete, with months of rehabilitation restoring much of his mobility, while leaving him unable to perform the complex service tasks that had made him invaluable to David's psychological stability. The partial recovery became symbol of resilience, while highlighting the permanent consequences of institutional violence against disabled citizens and their service animals. The resolution included establishment of the Bruno Martinez Service Dog Protection Foundation, which provided legal assistance and advocacy for other veterans facing similar discrimination. The foundation's work was funded by ongoing donations from the millions of people who had been moved by David's story, while recognizing the broader issues it represented. The community transformation was profound and lasting, with Millfield becoming a model for inclusive policies and police accountability that attracted positive national attention. The town that had been embarrassed by Thompson's assault became celebrated for its comprehensive reforms and commitment to protecting rather than persecuting disabled residents. The media legacy continued through annual coverage of Bruno's recovery and David's advocacy work, with major networks documenting how the incident had sparked nationwide reforms while inspiring similar advocacy efforts throughout the veteran community. The story became a case study in how social media could amplify injustice while creating accountability that traditional media had failed to achieve. 5 years later, David had become one of America's most influential advocates for service animal rights, his congressional testimony and media appearances educating millions about the realities of PTSD and the essential nature of service animal partnerships. His work influenced federal policy while inspiring local reforms that protected disabled veterans throughout the country. The final scene was both vindication and continuation. David stood, with Bruno now retired but healthy, at the dedication of Riverside Park's new service animal training area, where a memorial plaque honored all service animals, while educating visitors about their essential role in supporting disabled veterans and civilians. Bruno taught me that heroes come in many forms. David reflected during the dedication ceremony, attended by hundreds of supporters who had followed their journey from tragedy to triumph. Sometimes they wear uniforms, sometimes they have 4 legs, and sometimes they're teenagers with smartphones who refuse to let injustice go unnoticed. The real lesson isn't about what happened to us, but about what we can accomplish when communities decide that protecting the vulnerable is more important than protecting institutions that fail to serve them. The Bruno Martinez incident became a watershed moment for service animal rights and police accountability, establishing legal precedents and training requirements that transformed how law enforcement approached disability accommodation throughout the United States. David's advocacy work influenced federal policy while creating frameworks for protecting service animals and their handlers from institutional discrimination and violence. The immediate consequences revolutionized police training nationwide, with the Department of Justice mandating service animal education for all federally funded law enforcement agencies within 2 years. The program reached over 800,000 officers while preventing countless future incidents through enhanced understanding of disability accommodation and constitutional obligations. The Service Animal Protection Act created the first federal criminal penalties for assaulting service animals, with sentences up to 5 years in prison and $250,000 fines for law enforcement officers who violated service animal rights. The legislation influenced state laws throughout the country while establishing legal framework for prosecuting similar cases that previously had been treated as mere property damage. The legal precedents established through David's federal lawsuit strengthened enforcement of the Americans with Disabilities Act, while creating new standards for police interaction with service animal teams. The precedents influenced thousands of subsequent cases, while providing legal protection for disabled citizens who had previously been vulnerable to institutional discrimination and violence. The police training revolution extended beyond service animal education to encompass comprehensive disability rights instruction that addressed the full range of accommodations that disabled citizens might require during law enforcement encounters. The training influenced academy curricula while establishing professional standards that recognized disability accommodation as core law enforcement responsibility. The advocacy movement that emerged from David's case created new organizations focused specifically on service animal rights and police accountability. The Bruno Martinez Foundation became a leading voice for service animal protection while providing legal assistance training resources and policy advocacy that influenced legislation in all 50 states. The cultural impact transformed public understanding of service animal partnerships and the consequences of institutional ignorance about disability rights. David's story educated millions about PTSD and service animal training, while demonstrating that disabled veterans needed protection rather than persecution from the institutions they had served. The research that documented Bruno's recovery and David's advocacy effectiveness influenced academic understanding of trauma recovery and the therapeutic value of service animal partnerships. Peer-reviewed studies validated the medical necessity of service animals while demonstrating the devastating consequences of disrupting these essential therapeutic relationships. The international influence extended to allied nations whose law enforcement agencies adopted similar service animal protection protocols based on lessons learned from the American experience. The model influenced police training in Canada, Australia, and European Union countries, while establishing international standards for disability accommodation in law enforcement. The enduring message transcended individual triumph to encompass fundamental truths about institutional accountability and constitutional protection. Service animals were medical equipment deserving legal protection. Rather than police targets, disabled veterans earned accommodation rather than persecution through their military service, and the strongest communities were those that held institutions accountable for protecting rather than persecuting their most vulnerable citizens.